And it's very critical, but we have somebody at the mic. Yes.
Can you hear me?
My
name is Tala Fakuri. I'm an epidemiologist with the CDC, and I was a bench scientist in a previous life. I have a question to Dr. Croyle about how do you engage basic scientists who are really interested in answering questions that may not be related to anything, to cancer now. They just want to know, how does gene X affect the development of this organ or that organ in C. elegans or in Drosophila? How do you engage these basic scientists in the context of very limited budgets for research to be a part of the PMI initiative?
So I'll give a practical, maybe a little cynical answer, and then maybe one a little bit more lofty. What population scientists oftentimes have to offer to basic scientists are access to people, access to tissue, access to data, and that is that once you're trying to move something out of the laboratory, or let's say somebody works with a mouse model or a cell line model, whatever, trying to engage the research question that they're interested in. And once that moves into human populations, that's where those collaborations are really key. I think the other thing too is that the non-basic scientists need to learn how to communicate their science better to basic scientists. Oftentimes, I think I hear behavioral or population scientists say, I'm trying to work with a basic scientist, and I just can't understand what she's saying. And I said, well, can't she understand what you're saying? And so trying to learn to speak each other's language and also appreciate the methods used by each other's areas of science, I think is really key.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sylvia Silver from George Washington University. Dr. Sotomayor mentioned the fact that the patients really want research done. And I run a biobank. And HIPAA has caused more problems with trying to reach patients. In fact, now the discussions about changing the common rule are really concerned to biobankers. So what do you do with the fact that you want to protect the patients, but the patients would rather not have to have people go through all these hoops to try and reach them, to ask them if they could use their specimens? Because the amount of research has really decreased because we can't reach the patients. The physicians don't answer us, or they don't understand that they're really the way we can reach the patient. So I'm finding that, yes, people want research done, patients want research done, but the researchers really can't get access to the patients unless they go through a lot of hoops, which sometimes don't work. So what's your suggestion?
So let me just give you so before we have this system, we need to have a sort of what we call a universal protocol for tissue collection. And what we have currently right now is several islands of protocols, and they don't, so basically are not formulated to have these, from the beginning, answer the issue that you are raising. So with this protocol, we have the patient consents, and this has been reviewed by lawyers, by HIPAA, by patient advocacy groups, and they clearly tell us that we are allowed to use their tissue for not only for collection but also for molecular studies. So having that a unified protocol actually is going to help to solve this issue that you are mentioning.
But I do think that Dr. Silver is raising an important point, which is that there is retroactive application of today's legal advice to things that had excellent legal advice 10, 20 years ago and were collected per that excellent legal advice, but it's now different. And I think that is a very difficult issue, and it might be worth having a special symposium on, because there is work underway to modify the common rule, and we'd hate to see the loss of a lot of historical data. The historical data are very important and contribute tremendously to our ability to do research. And yet, it is often just absolutely impossible to go back and contact people, especially if you think that you discarded their identifiers, which is often the case. But now you're told, well, it's identifiable because you have tissue. Well, try to use the DNA from that tissue to identify the people and then recontact them to reconsent them. Good luck with that. That is not going to happen. Next question.
Hi, I'm Madeline Halpern from ICF, and I was wondering what you can do to make sure that the policy stays pace with the research so that you don't have people saying, well, if mammograms aren't very effective, maybe if everyone has dense breast tissue, we're going to give them all ultrasounds, and that may not be the most effective way, actually, since it hasn't been studied long term to check those cancers, but California has that policy now. So how do you make sure that the science and the policy are not running at different speeds?
Wow.
I'm not sure that there's an answer.
No,
I'm not sure there's truly an answer
Well,
to that question.
this issue of how do we help policymakers be better consumers of evidence, of science, it is huge in this context and all these contexts. And that's why I think you need really effective mediators, communication mediators, who work in an intermediate role in terms of explaining, clarifying, simplifying science and science evidence. So health communication is really key here, and the folks who've worked in the policy world know that the typical request by any member of Congress to their staffer is, gee, this is great, but could you get it down to a half page, and then I'll read it. And scientists often are not great at that. And effective science communication and being able to distill evidence, especially data, down to a digestible form that policymakers can consume. That's absolutely essential and enormous. The other thing is that we need to do better in getting our scientists in the scientific community engaged in policy issues. This issue about, every scientist knows that HIPAA is a barrier to research, but how many scientists are engaged in advocating for revising HIPAA regulations? Not many.
So if I can add, so within this cancer policy program at GWU, that's what we want to bring, the different stakeholders, basic scientists, population scientists, clinicians, patient advocacy group, and pharma. And then, so we have the lawyers at GWU and formulate the half a page that you are talking about so that they can go and convey in a good way that the consensus of this group of stakeholders. So bringing science with policy will require, I think, a framework, and that's what the cancer policy program that Dean Goldman and us are trying to build.
Great.
I think we will probably be most effective in the context of FDA, CMS, AHRQ, possibly not very effective in preventing things like individual states from enacting laws, and you can't, they read your half page, there are other scientists who'll give them a different half page that will say something different. And because almost any point of view, there's a scientist somewhere espousing it, right? And so, the best you can do is to try to establish that your science is more authoritative, that it's more vetted, that it's got more consensus.
Correct.
Around all the scientists, and even then, sometimes policymakers don't listen. So that's why I was saying there isn't completely an answer to your question, because the policymaking process isn't fundamentally a science process. But next question.
Hi, I'm Tim Newmas, a doctoral student at Morgan State University, and my area is health literacy. So when I heard you say health literacy, I jumped up. A lot of times we don't talk about that issue, but I'm listening to the conversation and writing about that. That's one of my areas of my dissertation focus is health literacy, particularly for men of color, which is an organization that I've started prior to getting my master's degree at the University of Baltimore. So when I heard the conversation, I'm concerned about the cultural sensitivity issue and how are you dealing with that, whether or not social marketing is something that you're looking at, and how are you actually breaking down those barriers so that information along those lines are actually getting to the people that you want to put into clinical trials. A lot of the sensitivity around that issue is probably because of those historical factors or those other issues that impact people of color, and so therefore they might not want to be in clinical trials. So my whole focus is changing the way health literacy is done in those particular situations.
Yeah, no, I think that's why the last several years we've invested research dollars in health literacy research, because I think it's just as important as any other domain of research. We funded, for example, a center of excellence in cancer communication research at St. Louis University and Washington University in St. Louis, led by Matt Kruder, that was really focused on how do we communicate about health disparities to African American communities, where they found that the communities were engaged in the issue, but the way it had been framed in such a negative frame was not enabling action or response. Eventually, what that NCI-funded research project evolved into was an Ozioma news service with black newspapers around the country, which provided a channel to deliver, up-to-date cancer research evidence to the community, but again, adapted and tailored to local cultures in a way that would resonate and communicate effectively. So I think one of the issues that we're going to really sustain in the next several years as a research funder is value communication research, just as we value biological or drug development research.
One last question. Sorry.
Good morning. My name is Tanja Kyle with ICF. Early in the presentation, we discussed the impact and benefits of the Precision Medicine Initiative. We also touched on the need to enroll more underrepresented populations and to ensure a more complete health picture. Beyond the goal of creating the million-person cohort, and considering today's focus of being at the crossroads between clinical and population sciences, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing the Precision Medicine Initiative, and how would you recommend overcoming those challenges?
So I think the major challenge will be finding the sustainability of the model. So it's good that the government is giving us the big start-ups, so with this cohort, but so we need to demonstrate that value, that precision medicine is the approach to lowering the cost of delivering cancer care in the not only in America but in the world. So it is expected that by year 2020, so the United States is going to spend near $90 billion in cancer care. And with personalized precision medicine, what we are looking is give the right patients the right treatment because we are going to identify biomarkers. So that's the hypothesis. By identifying biomarkers, we will be able to deliver better care. So there is going to be less admission or hospitalizations because we are going to be understanding how a particular patient will respond or not to a particular therapeutic approach. So that's the promise of personalized medicine. So we need to create the scientific basis to show that it works. And I think when we show value, then we are going to be able to have a sustainability model. And I think that the private sector is going to play an important role in working with academia and the government. So we had a great start with the Precision Medicine Initiative, but it's going to be, we need to be creative about how to sustain the model.
Yeah, I think a lot of that sustainability comes from developing creative ways to lower the cost of large-scale population research. So one of the funding announcements that we released last week related to the Precision Medicine Initiative is a whole component just focused on mobile health technology and using mobile technology and creating a whole resource for the PMI initiative so we can collect data and enroll and communicate with participants through their mobile devices. And we've got a lot of good creative examples around the country. In California, one of the cohorts we support is using Salesforce.com, their IT infrastructure and online software infrastructure, as a way to manage all of their participants in their research, recontact or whatever. So I mean, leveraging technology to lower cost. I think the other thing in terms of the sustainability issue and a challenge with the PMI initiative, the 1 million cohort component, is how do you balance breadth versus depth scientifically? Because to answer a particular specific scientific question or a hypothesis about disease etiology, you need a lot of measures about a lot of risk factors related to one particular disease. And we know from the National Children's Study experience, we have other large-scale projects where there's tension between doing a lot of things, but maybe superficially, doing versus a few focused things and doing them in depth. There's just a constant creative scientific tension between that. But I think one of the ways to address that is, again, by trying to really figure out how to utilize new technologies to lower the cost of conducting research. That's a must.